Hi, Inara. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this conversation because pessaries come up a lot in my world, in the work that I do with people. And I, of course, love people that are doing innovative, cool things and love the work that you're doing. So if you can start out by telling us a little bit about who you are and what led you down this path of wanting to improve the world of pessaries.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Kim. My name is Inara. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of FemTherapeutics. Our founding story is not as traditional as most founders. I actually went to McGill for my undergraduate degree, on track to pursue a Bachelor of Commerce and go into the consulting route. But I had the opportunity of doing a fellowship in the surgical innovation space in my second year of university, where I was actually matched with my peers, Negan and Dr. Gangle, who ended up becoming my co-founders later down the line. But we spent about a year in the OR and the ICU just trying to identify unmet clinical needs. So what started off as just exploring the gynecology sector eventually led us down into the bigger problem here, which was the unmet gap when it comes to preparing for that postpartum phase of pregnancy and delivery and aging. And so we saw a lot of frequencies when it comes to hysterectomy surgeries. Majority of patients were quite young and still had to be, scheduled for hysterectomy, which is, the removal of the uterus. And we thought, why is that the case? Why is this such a common procedure? Later boiled down to the fact that pessaries, which are the first line of treatment for pelvic organ prolapse and severe cases of stress urinary incontinence, haven't changed in decades. So we, explored that space a little bit. We looked into the devices that are currently on the market and understood that there was a 50% failure when it comes to using a pessary for a variety of reasons. So the first is they're just not accurately representative of the female anatomy. Female anatomy is more oval-like in shape, and when you look at these devices, they're very geometric, spherical, cube-like devices. Oftentimes they mimic a mushroom or a donut, and so when you try to fit these devices, they actually feel very, very uncomfortable, and so patients have a very low compliance with long-term use. 50% of the time, these devices will actually displace and fall out of the vaginal canal. And then we have about 60% of patients that actually report long-term complications because the devices are too tight. Now, physicians tend to fit these devices through trial and error, saying, look, I think you're a size 5 or I think you're a size 6. This can lead to devices being too tight or too small for patients, and that could lead to those long-term complications that I described above. So everything that I just mentioned is really what we see as the only option for patients that suffer from pelvic organ prolapse. And so we came in with this idea of providing more of a personalized model and reinventing the traditional pessary on the market to provide a more comfortable and effective method of support for patients looking for a non-surgical alternative to their treatment.
Very cool, very needed. What is a pessary, and so you've talked about a few of the shortcomings, but kind of taking a step back, what exactly is a pessary? What's the intention behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. So pessary is an intravaginal device that is inserted to support the pelvic floor organs. This can include the uterus, the rectum, or the bladder. So pelvic organ prolapse is a condition that affects 1 in every 3 women, which tends to occur once a patient has had a vaginal delivery or is aging and just experiences weakening in the pelvic floor muscles. And so these pessaries are used as a first line of treatment about 90% of the time. And they're also actually one of the oldest medical devices dating back to the Egyptians. So that's a little fun fact there. But yes, that's typically the most common use case for a pessary.
Yeah, I've done a couple of posts recently where I went back historically into what led to the development of pessaries and things like half of a pomegranate and inserting fabric soaked in petroleum, like really strange sounding and even barbaric at times sounding procedures even, or devices that were used. So glad that we at least got to the point of the current pessary, and they can be very helpful. There are some people who have difficulty with things like insertion and removal. I would say that is probably the biggest challenge, or what holds a lot of people back, whether it's accessibility and mobility, or even just even somebody who's very able-bodied and flexible still can have a difficult time actually putting it in and getting it into the right place. So how are you addressing that, or are you able to address that component?
Yeah, when you look at the average patient profile for, for a pessary, you typically see these patients are, within the age brackets of 50 to 70. That's where we see most commonly used patients using a pessary. And so those patients typically lack the finger dexterity to be able to insert a device and position it in the right way that doesn't lead to uncomfortableness down the line. And then in terms of them removing the device too, we see a lot of patients struggling with just being able to reach that far in to remove the device painlessly. And so when we look at the patterns for how frequently patients visit the physician office, we see that tends to happen about 4 to 5 times more than what is required, because they're unable to just remove the device for regular maintenance and cleaning. And so these devices have to be removed every 30 days, cleaned with unscented soap and water to remove any vaginal discharge. But what we're starting to see is these patients are unable to remove their devices that frequently, and so that leads to also infection risk down the line. And so we really understood that this was a huge pain point for a majority of patients, especially those that are much younger, because you want to be able to have control of your bodies for as long as you can. And having an autonomous treatment is extremely important for that younger demographic. And we're beginning to see that pattern in the older demographic as well. And so we created a pessary that actually has an applicator in it, so a reusable applicator system that will allow the patient to insert or load the applicator with their pessary. With the push of the plunger, it'll actually deploy and position the pessary comfortably within the vaginal canal. And there's also a collapsible string as well, so once tugged on, it actually compresses the device and removes it as well. So we're hoping that that'll make the process a little easier for them as well.
And what's your process in terms, I sort of jumped ahead there to the insertion and removal, but the actual personalization piece. So the pessaries that are currently on the market are, as you say, there are several shapes and sizes, but generally they're round or cube shape. They look like they should be uncomfortable, to be completely honest. I know they can really change lives and really provide a lot of support, and I'm not discounting them. I think they're amazing, but there are definitely limitations. And so the personalization piece, I think, is so interesting and so needed. What is your process of personalizing pessaries for people?
Absolutely. So we work in 3 steps. The first step is a simple measurement and assessment process with your provider. So a patient will go in and be booked in for a standard pelvic exam, where their provider will then take about 10 to 20 different pelvic floor measurements using the standard of care, which is called the POP-Q method, where they will assess the type and stage of prolapse and then take a few numerical measurements within the vaginal canal, such as the vaginal width, size of the cervix, the vaginal length. Those measurements, coupled with their patient metadata, such as their BMI, ethnicity, how many vaginal childbirths they've had, will then be able to provide us with an accurate representation of what their vaginal canal looks like, as well as their prolapse condition. So we actually create this simulation in 3D to understand how their prolapse looks. And then we apply our predetermined designs that our team have created, essentially to fit the simulation model and understand how the design reacts to those different prolapse mechanics in the simulation. And then we run a topology optimization algorithm that actually optimizes those designs or those measurements for that specific predetermined design. And the result is a personalized intravaginal device or a pessary that the patient then walks away with, which is 3D printed with biocompatible silicone. What's really important to note about our devices as well is we're not just taking the current standard designs that exist on the market today and personalizing the width and the length. We've actually redesigned the way these pessaries look to be more accurately representative of the vaginal canal for patients. And actually has a 2-level system where the first level receives the abdominal pressure and the base plate actually expands towards the side walls, which are supported by the pelvic bones. So this dynamic mechanism actually helps resist that displacement and provide a more comfortable feeling for the patient as the device moves, as they move. As their muscles contract, the device also contracts. So we're hoping that coupled with our personalization will lead to a more effective clinical outcome.
I love that. So I thought that I know that there are some other people talking about imaging of the pelvic floor first, like with ultrasound. So this one, you're taking the physical measurements that are currently, like many people are already doing, the POP-Q, as you mentioned. And those data points are then entered into like a computer program. I'm probably going to be saying the wrong terminology, but something the data is entered that then essentially creates the image without having to image the person. Is that
yeah. You got it. And the reason why we went down that route, instead of creating a 3D ultrasound or requiring our patients to do a dynamic MRI scan, which definitely is representative of their prolapse condition, you can take that image and then design a prosthetic according to that image. It's just not as accessible for a majority of patients, and it's expensive. Currently, patients are spending about $100 on a pessary, and so requiring them to then go in and do a 3D ultrasound scan or a dynamic MRI scan, that cost is quite prohibitive for a majority of patients that, in the US are beneficiaries of Medicare. And so in our case, we thought, can we leverage those manual measurements, make this as accessible as possible, get as many providers trained to conduct this exam, so that we can make this pessary very, very accessible to these patients, as well as creating this dynamic mechanism where at the end of the day you don't require those higher fidelity measurements because the device is so flexible. So if it has that high degree of flexibility, you can work with those lower fidelity measurements and still achieve the same success rates.
That's so super cool. And the other piece of that as you're talking is the wait times. I think you're in Canada, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. In Canada, it takes a really heck of a long time to see a doctor, and then a heck of a long time to get the testing or whatever it is that you need to have done. Like, it can be years for many people, which is another barrier. So as you say, the autonomous piece of it is so important. So you're talking about the sort of the flexible component of the nature of what the device is made of. A lot of the current pessaries, they're way harder than you think they should be. They feel very restrictive, and you just kind of feel it, and you think the expectation is it's going to feel uncomfortable. So what is it, you mentioned biocompatible silicone, what is it that changes the softness, I guess, or making it a little bit less rigid than the others?
Great question. So typically the pessaries that you see on the market today are made out of injection molded silicone, but they actually have plastic rods that are inserted to just reinforce the shape. Now, for a regular patient for a regular user that doesn't actually experience prolapse, you would look at this device and think, this is going to be extremely painful for me to insert. But for patients that actually have prolapse and use these devices on a daily basis, if they're fitted correctly, you won't even feel them. And so I think that's where a lot of the, misunderstandings are, is, sometimes the device can look very rigid, but once it's placed inside, it really doesn't feel as rigid as it did on the exterior.
Yeah.
But in our case, we don't actually work with those plastic rods. Our entire device is 3D printed directly with biocompatible silicone, and the silicone that we work with has a very high degree of flexibility. And so it allows us to have more of those softer feeling type of devices, but still offer the same level of support.
Mm-hmm. And I know we can't talk about the clinical trials, but you're currently undergoing clinical trials for the devices. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. The device is undergoing testing.
Yeah. What's the expected launch? And also what then, what will be the procedure? You've talked about care providers. So could that be a pelvic floor PT? Could that be a urogyne? Could it be a family doctor? So who could be a care provider? And what will the process be once things are ready to come to market?
Yeah, so we're really excited to be working towards our market approvals in the US and Canada over the next 6 to 8 months. So we anticipate launching as early as Q2 of 2025. Right now we are working with urogynecologists, obstetrics and gynecologists, as well as pelvic floor physiotherapists to fit our devices. And so we hope to be, on the market come Q2 of 2025, and we'll definitely have a list of providers that patients can reach out to get their initial fitting for one of our pessaries.
So the person would see their care provider, let's say it's a pelvic floor PT, they go in, they have the POP-Q assessment, those measurements are then sent through, do you have a portal, like the provider goes through a portal to submit those to you?
Correct. We have a clinician portal that essentially walks the provider through the process of how to conduct their fitting. Those measurements then get sent over on our end. We do the 3D visualization, we do the design work, and then we also do the manufacturing in-house in Montreal. And then that device gets shipped over to the provider within a 2-week time frame for the patient to come back for their first fitting.
Amazing. And this is probably a stat you don't know, but right now, I think it's 50, you mentioned 50%. So I think it's like 53% of like those first fittings are not successful, and some are never going to be successful. So hopefully that's one of the stats that we can improve upon this, that we have success pretty much the first time because we've accommodated for that person's anatomy.
Absolutely, that's the plan. So the statistic is around 30%, so 1 in every 3 patients will fail a pessary fitting. So we're really hoping to dramatically reduce that statistic and have every patient essentially have the option of whether they want to pursue surgical or non-surgical intervention instead of having to go with one route because they just aren't able to find a good fit.
Will this be something that could accommodate all types of pelvic organ prolapse? We've kind of used it as a bucket term. So bladder prolapse, uterine prolapse, rectocele. Could it help with enterocele? Could it help with urethral prolapse? And also then the bracket of incontinence, like stress urinary incontinence is a reason why some people may use a pessary as well. So can it help with all of those conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at prolapse, especially for those patients that have more severe cases of prolapse, it typically doesn't present as only one symptom or only one type of prolapse. We typically see a combination. Definitely cystocele prolapse presents itself quite frequently with rectocele prolapse. And you'll also see a combination of uterine prolapse as well. So we have challenged our team with actually creating designs that cater to all different types of prolapse combinations, as well as the degrees of prolapse as well. So our goal is to eventually have a certain number of SKUs that can then be modified to each patient based off of the level of support and the degree of support that they require to treat their condition.
Yeah, the rectocele, I've had a rectocele. I know many people in my community have a rectocele, and it's usually the one that is a little trickier to manage from a pessary perspective, and it's often dependent on where along the line of the rectum the bulge is, or along the back wall of the vagina the bulge is. And lower down or more advanced can be a little bit trickier to manage. Is that something that you've also taken into consideration, and like, do you feel like this is something that you also will be able to help?
Exactly, yeah. So we actually, with the guidance of our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Gangle, he essentially created this problem space for us where he challenged our engineering team with trying to solve the most complicated case of prolapse. And he said, look, if we can get this right, we can get the rest, no problem. And so actually one of our cases, or one of our patients that we have previously fitted, had a combination of rectocele and uterine prolapse. It was very severe, I want to say very late stages of stage 3 prolapse, and we had to create a custom pessary for her. What we've done on our end is created kind of a range of dimensions, or a range of how thick the device has to be, how long can the device be, how wide can the device be, and created those parameters so that we're working within those ranges when it comes to fitting those patients, so we can accommodate for those anatomical variations that you just described on how rectocele can present itself. So absolutely, that is our goal.
And how long so somebody goes through the process, 2 weeks later it's sent to their provider, they go in, let's say they have success, it feels great, they walk away. This is something that they would insert and remove every day, is that correct?
Oh, so our guidance is that they would insert and remove at least once every 30 days to remove of any vaginal discharge. But if the patient feels comfortable retaining it for the duration of those 30 days consecutively, that is also fine. Okay,
so somebody who is sexually active from an insert of sex perspective, this would need to be removed. But if they wanted to, it could be left in. So it doesn't have to be taken out in every single day. It could be left in 30 days straight.
Absolutely, yeah. And
wow.
The way that we've designed our devices is that you would be able to have intercourse with the device inside as well. So that is our goal with our designs.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, all right. You're opening up a whole bunch of. This is amazing. You're covering like all the biggest challenges with pessaries. Okay.
And it's exciting to finally, I think, with FemTherapeutics, we have 2 females that are leading, all of our design works, and myself, and we have Megan Ashuri, who is our CTO. It's really refreshing just being able to vocalize a lot of those pain points that these patients experience, because I think if we look back into, who created the first device and where we are now, I feel like a lot of those pain points have been missed because the design work was never led by a female that understood those pain points. So it's great to finally be in charge of that and to lead Pessaries in a direction where more patients and more females would be very much, happy and comfortable using a device like this.
Amazing. And so with that piece of knowledge, somebody like, as you were saying, Pessaries historically, or people still believe like pessary is only for old, quote unquote, old people. But younger, like anybody can use a pessary and benefit from a pessary. That being said, as you said, the 50 to 70-ish, 77, I think is what you had said, population is the most common. That's usually around the start of somebody's menopause. So we're dealing with some hormonal changes as well, which can also be part of the contributor to the tissue disruption that happens with insertion and removal. But many of these people would potentially hopefully be using vaginal estrogen and other creams and vaginal DHEAs. So if insert of sex is possible, then also inserting your vaginal estrogen cream or the ovules or that type of thing, would that be accessible, allowed?
It's definitely something that we are currently running tests on, but yes, you're absolutely right in identifying that most of the time pessaries are used in conjunction with vaginal estrogen cream to help with erosions or dryness. And so we've actually done a lot of research as well and spoken to a few strategic partners where we think we might be able to eventually make a pessary that is pre-coated with estrogen as well.
Yes.
In the line, because we're working with directly 3D printed biocompatible silicone that does have the potential of carrying or doing a lot of that drug delivery. And so it's opening up a lot of doors down the line where we can make this process as user-friendly as possible.
I love that. Yeah, the E-string comes to mind, which is already like a pessary, but it's not providing the support level that we would need. But it's something that's left in for 3 months, really. So
Exactly.
Okay. Very cool. You guys are thinking of everything. So I can leave it in for up to 30 days and then I remove it. As you mentioned, you had some strings that contribute to a little bit of sort of a collapse to allow for easy removal. Is it then I need a new one after that 30 days, or do I clean and reinsert that same one? And how long, if that's if that is correct, then how long would I be able to do that before needing a new one?
Yeah, so we recommend cleaning it with unscented soap and water, and then the device can be reinserted just as you did the first time. And we recommend for coming in for refitting or getting a replacement device within the 1 to 2 year time frame. We're still conducting tests on that, but the reason why we suggest that time frame is also with higher compliance of pessaries over time, you can also begin to see some strengthening of the muscles and potentially require a smaller size. And so it's just getting into that routine habit of seeing your provider on a regular basis and informing them of any changes in terms of lifestyle needs or anatomical changes over the next couple of years, and hopefully we'll be able to get you fitted with a device that's more representative down the line.
Yeah, I love that. And the way that you're describing the sort of the adaptability of the silicone to movement, that could, like even now with the current pessaries, there are some people who actually don't like doing some exercise with it in because they feel like it's too rigid and it prohibits some of their function. There's other people that feel their muscles work better when they have their pessary inserted because it sort of frees up the muscles to not be having to manage their bulges. But with the way that you're describing yours, I feel like the majority would, like kind of like when we ideally insert a tampon and don't feel it, we wouldn't feel it per se. It's just adapting to however we're moving through all the activities that we're doing.
Exactly. That is the hope with the material combination as well as the design of our new pessaries.
Can you just come back to, I want to explore a little bit about how you were saying that the two-part where there was one that's almost like a pressure from the top. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Explain a little bit more about the thought process behind it and how it will actually function?
Yeah, so if you look at our website right now, we have showcased one of our pessary designs where it's a 2-level system. The first level receives the abdominal pressure, so it's almost like a small circle at the top where the cervix is intended to rest upon, essentially holding the cervix, if you will. And then the base plate, which is connected by side rods, supports the pressure being applied from the top and forces that pressure to then disperse towards the side walls, expanding the base plate of the device. typically we see with pessaries, they tend to have those rigid plastic portions on the anterior and posterior sides of the pessary, which is supported by the bladder and the rectum. But in our case, we've done a lot of research and we've understood that if we push the pressure towards the side walls of the vaginal canal, which don't come in contact with the bladder or the rectum, we can provide a more stable and comfortable fit for the patient, because the side walls are actually supported by the pelvic bones. 50% of the time, these pessaries displace because they don't have an anchor point or a stable resting point within the body. And so by having this pressure distribution mechanism and by forcing the pressure specifically towards the side walls, we're starting to see a lower dislodgement or less rotation with the pessary based off of the designs that we've created.
I think about the Poise Impressa, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and some of what you're talking about is this is an over-the-counter, technically designed for stress urinary incontinence, but it's like a tampon insertion. There's a top part and a wider part on the bottom, and there's strings that can help with removal. So I've always looked at that as being, I like that. I like the ease of it. I use it personally when I'm using higher intensity exercise. And I do, and I don't feel it. Like I put it in and it's not there, and then I just do my stuff and I carry on. And I like that. I like the ease of it. I don't like that it is a single use device. And I'm chomping at the bit for your product to be ready, because I think it's going to be such a game changer. I'm really, really excited about it.
Absolutely, we're very excited as well. I think Poise Impressa has done a great job at just providing solutions to patients that are struggling with stress urinary incontinence. But as soon as you enter into that prolapse space, and you're right, a reusable component is increasingly becoming more and more important as the years go on. Just trying to create a sustainable cycle here for our products too, and that reusable applicator system is also something that's not designed to not be single use, because we want to just create that sense of routine and that habit for these patients. We also see, sometimes we hear horror stories of patients putting in their pessaries and forgetting about them. They'll come in years later and experience symptoms related to infections, and they'll be like, I don't know why I have an infection or why this is happening, but it's because they weren't taught or trained to get into that routine of insertion, removal, cleaning, and then reinserting. And so we're hoping that with our reusable products we'll create that cadence and just provide more of that education and awareness in this space, specifically for those patients that are older, so we can avoid those problems from happening down the line.
One final question I have is, with vaginal vault prolapse, so somebody who has had a hysterectomy, and as you're talking about the top potentially close to the cervix, if the person no longer has a cervix, is that, like, when you think about the complicated cases, have you done any thought process? I'm sure you have, but is there any option? Because currently vaginal vault can be, again, another challenge that is not necessarily well managed with pessaries. So have you put any thought on that, and is there anything that you think could be helpful for them as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we do have, I want to say, one patient that's currently enrolled in our studies right now that has a vaginal vault prolapse. So we have designed a newer kind of pessary design for that particular patient, because you're absolutely right that, holding that cervix, creating that smaller circumference at the top is no longer as important. But it has presented with, certain challenges that our design team is still working on, but it is a lot more common than you think. And another condition that we were also recently exposed to is also the inverse uterus. A uterus that's positioned in its inverse position. And so that also requires some design changes on our end as well to account for those anatomical differences. So those are all design problems that our engineering team is working towards. But for our initial launch, in Q2 of 2025, we are looking to target those main three categories of prolapse, which is the uterine, rectocele, and cystocele prolapse. And certainly down the line, we hope to be able to cater to vaginal vault prolapse as well.
And is this something that could be used in pregnancy?
So that is an exciting opportunity for us. I think, we've created this infrastructure or this platform that allows for patients allows for providers to create customized silicone-based prosthetics for their patients. And while we're initially focused on prolapse and stress urinary incontinence, down the line we certainly see pessaries being used to also treat cerclage cases. So these patients that have cervical incompetence that require a device to essentially hold their cervix closed instead of doing a cerclage procedure, that is definitely the next step for us, and one that we're already starting to have conversations around with strategic partners. So very much looking forward to eventually building out our pipeline beyond just prolapse and stress urinary incontinence.
Yeah, very, very cool. So you mentioned your website. What is your website? Where can people find you? You are currently in clinical trials now. Will there be future ones, or like can people sign up for potentially future studies?
Absolutely. If you're a patient or provider, please check out our website at www.femtherapeutics.com. You'll see a contact form for you to fill out, and we'll be in touch if you're a good fit for our prospective clinical studies, or potentially onboarding you into our provider network to get your patients fitted with a custom pessary. If you're just looking to follow along as well, do follow our social media. So on Instagram, we're just at FemTherapeutics, and LinkedIn as well. That's where you'll see a lot of our posts and our updates over the next few months.
Amazing. And I'll have all of those links in the show notes so people can click over quickly. But super, super excited. I thank you for all the amazing research you're doing and for everything you're doing to move the needle forward in this area. I have lived experience. I have experience of working with so many people, and it really is something that can help people in their tracks and is so mismanaged currently. I think there's just such a huge need for what you're doing, and I'm really excited for my own body, but also for the bodies of the people that I work with as well. I think this is really going to transform lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to share what we're building as well. We look forward to being able to just provide a more effective and comfortable treatment for those patients that have been living with prolapse for far too long.
Yeah, thank you so much.